Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barry Toomey. I'm the Centre Director with Advance in UCD, and I suppose, playing host to this webinar, it's Digital Policy and Insights and Trends. So we're going to be hearing from a few speakers shortly. And I suppose just to kick it off, I'll just give you a quick update on the webinar itself. Just make sure the slides work. So we're going to get a quick introduction from Circa Mulcahy when she's able to join us. She's the Centre Manager in UCD for the Micro-Credentials Project, which is another HCI Pillar 3 activity. Then followed by that, we're going to hear from Ciarán Conlon. So he's working with both Liz and Yet on the Digital Policy Centre in UCD, and he's going to give us an overview from, I suppose, the industry perspective and Microsoft perspective as well. And then Dr. Elizabeth Farries is working as the Director in UCD for the Centre of Digital Policy, and working on the courses that are on offer, and then should be supported by Yet Clock Eaters, and Yet is working as a researcher in the Centre for Digital Policy. In terms of the Advanced Centre itself, it was founded in 2020, and it's a collaborative activity between UCD, ATU and TU Dublin. It's a HCI Pillar 3 funded activity, and that's focused around industry future skills needs. And digital policy is very much at the forefront of that, because data and digital policy management pretty much go hand in hand, and they cross all sectors. So it's quite an interesting topic from lots of different perspectives. So hopefully we'll get some of that from our speakers. The project itself, then, we work closely with the micro-credentials activities as well as the Higher Ed 4.0 and ATU, where it's pretty much identifying skills gaps in industry or with individual learners, and then pointing them towards courses then that they can use to fill these gaps. So a micro-credential is an individual module that you can take outside of a program or a traditional program. So you can actually just enroll in the module itself, take on that learning, but because it's accredited, you can use those credits towards an award in future. And that's one of the main things that the Pillar 3 is working on, is to try and offer these courses, accredited courses, from level 6 all the way through to level 9. And it's that module to masters approach. So you can start with a module, and then if you want to continue learning, you keep on adding your credits up, and that can give you a route towards an award. The aim of this is to make sure that the learning is as flexible as possible. So some of the content is online, some of the content is blended, but then there's also coursework or lab work that suits being face-to-face. So there might be intensive days where you come in for a full day and you get your lab work done for the whole module. So each course is a little bit different, but the aim is to try and make it as flexible and accessible as possible. Like most universities, the intakes are primarily based around September and January, but there are some summer entries as well. In terms of the Advanced Centre, the main area is just trying and give that flexible learning pathway. So as I was saying about a micro-credential, that's typically 5 credits. But then if you add extra credits, if you do extra modules, that might give you enough credits then to apply for a certificate, onto a diploma, or onto a master's. So it's that taking the module within a program and starting that learning journey. And that's really the focus of this type of flexible, non-traditional pathway. In terms of the Advanced Centre itself, we've got modules and programs in 11 different theme areas, broadly under the digital transformation umbrella. So that covers everything from digital manufacturing to digital architecture, and then onto areas such as AI, medicine, and even quantum engineering and computing. Today, we're going to be hearing about data and context. So we have a number of modules and programs in that area that we're going to hear a little bit about. In terms of the courses available in that theme, there's a professional cert in digital policy. So that's kicking off in September. And again, if there's any further information needed on these areas, just get in touch and we'll try and provide you with as much information as we can. And then there's also a digital methods program, and that's a 10 credit module, and that's starting in January. So look, there's our contact details, and in terms of the website as well, you'll also find just a broad summary of what we're doing. And if you have any questions, get in touch and we'll try and put you in contact with the right people. So look, just to kick us off then, I'm going to hand over to Circa. So if she can turn on her camera and join in, and I'll do the first handoff. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Barry, and hello everyone. I hope you're all keeping well. I am just going to share my screen. So one slide to share. Can everybody see that? Hopefully you can. Okay, so my name is Ciarán Conlon, and I'm the project lead for UCD micro-credentials. And we are also part of a larger project with a group of universities, including Trinity DCU, Limerick, Maynooth, Cork, and Galway. And we're working together to develop micro-credential courses, so under the auspices of the Microcreds project. Barry has already mentioned micro-credentials, so you'll know a little bit about them, and maybe you're familiar with the term already. But I'm just going to tell you a brief bit about UCD micro-credentials. So what we're talking about here, as Barry says, is short credit-bearing courses. So they're very much aimed at helping people who are working, who are busy, who want to upskill in particular areas, but maybe short on time and are looking for a more flexible way of upskilling. So all of our micro-credential courses are part-time, and they're typically delivered over a 6 to 12 week period. So our delivery modes are typically either fully online or else a blended or hybrid delivery. And we have several micro-credentials where you can effectively work away at your own pace. They're on demand. And all of the micro-credentials are designed to meet specific skills gap needs or needs that have been identified within particular professions or sectors where there's a need for upskilling. All of the courses are delivered by leading UCD academics, so you have all the benefits of a UCD education, the access to the library, the access to the world-class academics, all of that, but just over a shorter and more flexible time period. So we cover a range of different topics, and there are more coming on stream all of the time. You can see on my slide there just a listing of some of the topics. Some of those Barry has mentioned already, obviously the data science, financial maths, health data analytics. So those are some of the advanced micro-credentials offerings. But we're also working with a number of other UCD schools. So they're delivering micro-credentials in a range of different topics. So we have everything from a whole range of law-related micro-credentials, Irish law, natural resources law, environmental law, to a number of micro-credentials for healthcare professionals. So covering everything from concussion awareness to radiation protection. And we also have a number of micro-credentials in the areas of food and nutrition and sustainable agriculture as well. So our offering is growing all the time. We have more courses coming on stream. So what I would really encourage you to do is, if you'd like to check out our website, so you can see the address on the slide there, ucd.ie/micro-credentials, for a full listing of all the courses and just more information as well on what a micro-credential is, how it works, what you get, and so on. As Barry mentioned, with the micro-credentials, the beauty really is that they can be taken as standalone courses. It may just be a specific piece of knowledge that you need. Or in many cases, they can be accumulated or built up towards different types of university award. So lots of interesting progression opportunities there as well. So if you keep an eye on the website, you'll see we have lots more micro-credentials coming on stream. You can sign up for our newsletter and we'll keep you posted if there are any particular areas that you're interested in. And please feel free to get in touch if you'd like to find out more about any of our courses. Our next intake will be in September, and there are micro-credentials running every trimester. So typically starting in September, January, or May. So thank you very much, everyone. Hand back to Barry. I'm sorry, Barry, I'll stop sharing.
Yep, that's great. Thanks very much, Circa. And look, just as I'm introducing Ciarán now for his portion of the webinar, if there's any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A section and we'll have a chance to answer any of these at the end. And if it's just an operations question, we'll answer it on the way through. So look, there'll be a chance to chat at the end and answer any of these questions. So look, feel free to add them in. Ciarán, I'll hand off to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry, and thanks to the Advanced Centre for hosting today and for the interest in the course. As a non-Zoom native, people might just bear with me for a moment as I attempt to share, and I'll go back to the start of the slide. So can people see that, Barry? If you can just confirm that's okay?
Yep.
All good. Well, look, folks, just thanks for your interest today. I know there are lots of other competing options out there, but just to give some context, Microsoft are partnering with UCD on the Digital Policy Masters program, with the diploma and the cert as well, which is kind of the focus for today. Part of the context and backdrop for that is that with a policy area that is as complex and dynamic and fast moving as digital policy in its broadest remit, and we see obviously AI taking a lot of the headlines in recent weeks and months, Microsoft understood that the challenge for governments to try and legislate and regulate in these areas is challenged by that very complexity and speed of evolution of the challenge. And there was a gap that we identified in terms of the capacity within the public service in terms of these very technical and evolving and dynamic areas. So the idea was to set up a program in collaboration with UCD, but also involving the government and other industry stakeholders to try and design a program that would help empower the officials, the politicians, the NGOs, the trade associations, to have better and more informed conversations to lead to better policy. So that's the backdrop and the context. My own background, I'm not a technology person. I worked in politics for many years, in government and outside government as an advisor. So what I want to do today is just give a little bit of a political context to these types of conversations, in that when policy and politics collide, it isn't always that pretty. And sometimes people that are not familiar with the politics can be very frustrated with how the process works. So I just want to paint the picture of how that process works a little bit and how we might actually make a little bit of progress. So we'll kick off. This is an abridged version of a presentation that I give to the master's class each year. So Liz, for instance, might be bored of seeing some of this, but hopefully she'll bear with me as well. So this is, imagine a politician, they've just been elected, they've been appointed to government, they've gone up to meet the president, they've got their seal of office, they come back into their new department, all shiny, fresh, impassioned about the possibilities of making a difference. And on the first day in their department, they're going to have to start thinking about what their priorities are. And so I would ask, what do you think the priorities for that minister on the first day in office is? We don't really have the time today to have a more deliberative and discursive attempt, but maybe you can put some priorities into the chat just to reflect on them as we go through it. So in a slightly disappointing sort of exposition for me, and this isn't a definitive view, this is just my view, the priorities that the minister will have on day one in the department The first one is re-election. You're no good if you're not re-elected because you can't deliver your program. So a good politician and a good minister will be looking to make sure that he is re-elected. That should be their number one priority, a political priority. The second one is retain their position in cabinet. You can't really drive change and implement the types of policies that you might be passionate about unless you're at the table. So you have to work to keep your position at cabinet, because there will be a reshuffle in 2 years' time. Third is how you perform in the Dáil, or if you're not Irish in background originally, that's our national parliament, but it's the real village in which everybody is judged in politics at a national level. If you don't perform in the parliament, you get a bad reputation and you're not seen as credible, and hence you look back to number 2 priority, and then that becomes at risk, which then in turn endangers your re-election prospects. The programme for government is the Bible. When you're in government, it's usually a coalition government in Ireland, but if it's not in the programme for government, it's almost impossible to get new content implemented, because it's just so complex and there's so many counterbalancing interests in government to try and get new content through. So if it's not in the programme for government, which is the agreed document by the coalition parties or the lead party, then it's unlikely to happen. You've got a department to run as a minister, so you have a departmental agenda, you've resources, you've HR, you've got structural issues. So that's a big priority as well, because you have to show to a department that you're a credible figurehead for the department. You've got your external stakeholders. If it's farming, you've got farmers, and you've got, you know, the environmental groups, and you've fisheries people. If it's industry, you've got your IBEX and your trade associations and your chambers. But there's also always stakeholders in whatever department. You need to be able to know what they're thinking about, speak to their interests, and be attuned to what they're doing. The 7th priority will be media, I would say, because you just can't be a credible or an impactful politician unless you get your message across. I think there's too much on social media now, and not enough just on more substantive exposition of policy, but that's just a personal agenda of mine and a personal opinion. The last item, which is the slightly depressing element of this, if you're not familiar with that political environment, is policy innovation. All those other issues tend to drive the political agenda if you are a minister and you're trying to do a good job. You have all these competing elements, and then there's a certain window of opportunity. It might be 5%, 10%, it might be less, where a good minister will have some headspace to deliver on content. Okay. Now, when we turn to digital policy, one of the questions that people tend to ask is, you know, who are you going to call? Who if you've got a digital policy crisis at 3 a.m. in the morning, who do you pick up the phone and ring in government? And that's one of the big challenges, because digital, if you're a farmer, or if you're a train driver, or you're a teacher and you have an issue, you know exactly what minister you're meant to talk to. If you've got an issue with some aspect of digital policy, who do you get in touch with? Who do you talk to? And this is one of the big challenges in every government, and it's no different in Ireland. So what I want to do is just give a quick flick through, and this could go on for a bit longer, but I'll try to do it quickly. This is how digital policy is dispersed across the governance system. So the first thing is the national parliament. So you've got your ministers, you've got your opposition parties, you've got your Oireachtas committees, you've got your cabinet subcommittees. These are all discursive, deliberative forums in which policy is knocked about and discussed and debated. You might see it on the wrap-up of the news at 9 o'clock or 6 o'clock, what happened in the Dáil today. The next thing is government buildings. So that's where the Taoiseach is based, and that's a real node of power within government. You've got the Taoiseach, and the Taoiseach's office helps coordinate the national digital strategy. You've got the Department of Public Expenditure, which these are all the government departments now, led by the out of government buildings. You've got the government CIO, you have cloud policy. Over in enterprise, you've got the generation and management of the NDS, but you're also looking at AI, online trading vouchers, future jobs. In the Department of Justice, you'd be evidence, lawful access, in media and tourism. That's too long a title to get onto one bubble. You've got the audiovisual and media services, media regulation, online safety. We've also the new Commission Amman set up in the last number of months. Over in environment and climate, you've got cybersecurity, which has AirGrid, which has the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, the Environmental Protection Agency, telcos, broadband, all these issues impacting on digital. In education, you've got technology in schools, now that it's been separated out from the Department of Ferris. In finance, finance drives corporation tax, digital taxation, all these issues impact to a degree on digital policy. Over in housing, you've got responsibility for European funding stream, the RDF and ESF, which feed into digital expenditure as well. You've got the broadband officers in every local authority. Over in the Department of Higher Education, you've got SFI, you've got the HEIs, all the universities, and then over in rural and community development, you've got broadband connection points, your digital innovation program, and again, it's all part of the mix. And that's just the start of it, because then you've got the government agencies that have an impact, SFI, Enterprise Ireland, IDA, Comreg, the Data Protection Commissioner, National Cybersecurity Centre, NSAI, SkillNet, Solus, all these names. You've the sustainable what is it, SEAI, Authority of Ireland, Energy Authority of Ireland. And then the big one is Commission Amman, that has regulatory responsibility for media, online safety and broadcasting. And that's a new agent, a new regulatory body that's in its early days. And that's not the end of it. You've also got Brussels, the Commission, the Parliament, you have the Council of the EU, you have the Court of Justice, and all these things interact and cross over. And it leads you to say, how does anything of any substance ever get done? How do you get any policy? How do you join the dots? And it can be sort of daunting, but again, just to understand how one gets to an end point of an imperfect solution, that's just part of the context. Now, I do think there is a way that you can get to some sort of progress. I think you need to bring in these 3 or 4 different groups. So you have to get the politics right and understand where politics intersects with industry, which intersects with society, and which intersects with policy. And if you have a good perspective on those 4 different elements, and those 4 different elements are interacting, sharing information, not having one group dictate overly above and beyond another, but sharing information. And so academics coming in on the policy side, feeding in, the politicians being open to engagement, industry having to be good partners and credible partners, and society always bringing society with you. And that's one of the biggest challenges. If you imagine the AI debate in the context of this sort of diagram, I think it tells you how complex a challenge that will be. And if you don't bring society with you, and if you lose society, then the technology faces serious challenges. So almost there, we're nearly getting to the end. So in terms of developing better digital policy, these are the things that I think are key. So you do need capacity building within the system so that you can have more complete policy conversations, and that everything isn't just defaulted to a CIO or the Office of the Government CIO or Science Foundation Ireland. You know, ideally we get to a point where we don't even think of digital policy, we just think of policy. Because digital is becoming so pervasive. We have to develop partnerships. I think our partnership with UCD is a very good example of how industry, academics, and ultimately government can pool resources, thinking, and come to the table with an open mind on how do we make things a little bit better. I think you have to engage with your stakeholders to bring them with you and to understand what the issues are, because there's always a danger that policy becomes detached from the real life sort of experience on the ground, and that's always a problem. And with digital, there's always a problem with legislation development, that by the time the legislative process rumbles through to a conclusion after 2 or 3 years, typically in Brussels or in Dublin, by the time you've got the solution over the line, the problem that you've been trying to solve has moved on and it's a new problem. So there's always this lagged issue in terms of legislative solutions to policy challenges. And that's why we need to be a little bit more agile, a little bit more engaged, and be able to move a little bit quicker. So I think building trust is vital. And I would say from an industry point of view, that is absolutely critical, that we have to have good actors stepping forward and saying, we need to work together on this. And there needs to be trust developed on both sides. I would say political prioritization of this agenda, it's always hard. There's always hospital waiting lists, housing, budgets coming up. There's always something that can grab the attention, but this is, I think, a really strategic, significant policy area that needs to be prioritized. And at all times, I would say, be aware of the randomness of politics and how a by-election in a constituency can throw the balance of power, how European elections can reverse their impact into national politics, and then also how the Commission is set up. There's always random events that impact on good policy development. But I think if we do take on board these types of ideas, that, ultimately, you get to keep the good, try to get rid of as much of the bad as possible, and learn to live a little bit with the ugly, and know that you'll always be able to move on and have another go at it next time and maybe do a little bit better. So that's really a whistle-stop tour of that sort of perspective on how politics and policy interact, and the challenge that is inherent in that interaction, so that if we all understand that a little bit better, I think we can get to a better policy set of outcomes. So that's why the UCD program is really such a good case study of how that collaboration can bring about, I hope, better outcomes.
All right, thanks very much for that, Ciarán.
I'm hearing some instability on my end. I hope it's not my internet connection.
Lots of easy ones. So look, I suppose, we'll introduce Liz anyway, and hopefully if I go on mute, it'll clear it up a little.
Thanks very much, Barry, and to you as well, Joanne, to the Advanced Center and to the Micro-Credentials Center for inviting us on today. I really appreciate, growing up in Canada, during the time that I grew up, I really love Ciarán's movie references. They speak to me, and so it hasn't gotten old, Ciarán. It's great. I love the Ghostbusters scene in particular. What we're going to do for this little section of the talk is sort of flesh out some of the concepts Ciarán has raised in a digital policy context. We'll talk about how our center responds to those concepts, and we'll talk about our center's outputs, including our educational outputs and the micro-credential that we're bringing forward in autumn 2023, with thanks again to Barry and Joanna for bringing that on board. So yes, I'm Elizabeth Ferris, Liz Ferris. I direct the UCD Center for Digital Policy together with Professor Eugenia Ciapera. And as Ciarán mentioned, there's just this real need to develop digital policy capability amongst the public and private sector in Ireland and across, the wider European Union and certainly the world. And that is the focus of our center. And we do that in a number of ways. Our point is to look at the emergent policy landscape and consider the opportunities and risks that are before us. And to do that, and I've got two quotes, one from the World Economic Forum lead on the left side of the screen, and one from Professor Savino on the right-hand side of the screen, which describe the desire to embrace technological innovation, to embrace the new technologies that certainly in this year are coming down the pipe very rapidly, to procure them, to integrate them into all aspects of our lives. And on the other hand, to be absolutely certain that we take into account the broad range of risks that can be attached to some of these new technologies, and to ensure that our research, our uptake, our deployment of new technologies, the speed and scale of which would have been really inconceivable even a few years ago, occur in ways that are ethical, that are safe, and that are lawful. And that's the point of digital policy. And so, as Ciarán mentioned, there are a number of factors that are involved, and our center certainly focuses on the stakeholder question. We see in the digital policy landscape the importance of engaging government, the importance of engaging industry, big tech, and also small and medium enterprises, academia, academics working not just in public policy, not just in law, but in computer science, as well as social science and in human rights. And then to bring that together with representatives of communities, typically NGOs, which are recognized at the EU level as instruments of government accountability. And so our center takes these broad stakeholder groupings together and structures it into our architecture. We have our central team, but then we have an advisory board that is made up of these 4 stakeholder groups. And then we have an academic membership. And we have ambassadors that come in and support our program together with Ciarán, but also Jean Carberry, who is sort of the digital lead in Ireland, the digital ambassador to the EU. We've got Dr. Richard Brown here on the right, who is the director of the National Cybersecurity Center. They support our center's research outputs and also as speakers in our programs. And they look, as we do at the center, as focusing on communities, centering the citizen, and considering citizen users of technologies. And we've seen in policy spaces that there are really 2 perspectives of citizens that are used and are impacted by technology. There's this idea of citizens being passive consumers in need of policy protection. And there's this more recent idea coming out about people and citizens being active consumers, active engagements with the people who are actively engaging with the policy landscape, and therefore are in need of up-to-date and accessible information, capacity to engage, and just a general sense of agency in the policy landscape. And so towards that, our outputs are peer-reviewed. I've taken recent peer-reviewed publications from the central team here and listed them from Professor Aphra Kerr, from myself, from Dr. Marco Bastos, from our university Vice President Colin Scott, who is on our central team. And we have those peer-reviewed outputs, which we teach in our programs. And here's a picture of Colin talking about deploying a regulatory toolkit in EU digital policy. And he comes in and explains the various components of what he sees as a regulatory toolkit cycle. And Colin will be publishing that piece with Cambridge as soon as possible is what I'd like to do, because I'd like to put those reading materials into the course. But what we also do at the center is we don't just focus on those peer-reviewed publications. We also put out government advisory papers. We send submissions to parliaments, to the Oireachtas. We give submissions to the United Nations. We co-publish with industry. We've got the Democratic Values in the Digital Age series. We put out a white paper with Microsoft on that. And then we put out primary data reports around which peer-reviewed publications can be built. And we just last month published a public perceptions of AI report based on a massive representative survey that we did here in Ireland of perceptions of AI use and deployment. And in addition to that, we try and workshop as much as possible. We welcomed Harvard to our center last year, and we put together a disinformation workshop for journalists in Ireland. We also had a platform governance conference, a democratic values in the digital age series, and we hosted a number of guest seminars, working papers, and discussions. And that's that part of that collaboration that Ciarán was talking about. It's not enough to identify the stakeholders, but you start to need to build a network of engagement and discussion, to build those relationships, to build those trusts, and to share the ideas and values across groups. And so as Ciarán said, like, media discussions aren't a massive priority. They're certainly not a priority for the center, but we are called on from national papers at any rate in Ireland to discuss digital policy issues as they arise. Discussions about which companies to engage with when buying certain tech, what kind of tech to use to govern populations. And so we're in the papers about that as well. Our education programs, which is what I'd really like to push here, because we are entering year 4 of our education programs. We have a master's in science, a graduate diploma, and a professional certificate. And now we're piloting this micro-credential in digital policy with the Advanced Center, which will be starting September 2023. And we're really excited about that final piece, because what we're doing for our educational offerings is that we're trying to respond to the requirements of the people that are looking to update their education, either at the certificate level or at a full master's level. So we offer what is referred to as synchronous blended learning, meaning if you are in your office and trying to take a master's at the same time, you can do exactly what we're doing today, which is you can just join online. So we offer a face-to-face classroom environment, and then also opportunities to come in and work in the online space. And we also try to change the lecture environment, in that if I'm delivering a module, for example, you're not just going to be hearing from me. We try, to the extent possible, based on expert availability, to bring in those experts and those guest speakers from the stakeholder groups that I've described, so that we ultimately have a lot of expert keynotes and roundtables, which provides students in our program this opportunity to immerse themselves in digital policy questions that are happening right now on the ground, and to be in that digital policy space as much as possible. And so that's the point of the professional certificate in digital policy. That's the point of this new micro-credential that we're offering, is to give sort of a taster test of the larger program material that would be offered at the master's level, sort of an entry-level discussion about what digital policy means today. And then we also do have a few other educational offerings. Got a picture of myself and Ciarán and Richard Brown and Jen Carberry in this picture. We put out a primer on cybersecurity last year, or not even last year, within the last 6 months, I think it's just an educational offering, a series of short, again, taster test videos on what cybersecurity is, how it is applied, why it's important, where are the key topics that are coming up in Ireland. And we offer that educational series on our website, digitalpolicy.ie. Everyone can have a look at it if they like. And we've got plans, initial plans to do a similar series on AI in Ireland. And then again, the whole point is just to be as immersive as possible. And so when there's policy discussions happening on the ground and in Ireland, the center attempts to be there as much as possible, and also to bring in our students. And so this is this photo is an example of sort of the co-created learning formats that we offer. This is Frances Hogan on the right, Meta whistleblower, who has now got a fellowship at a research center in Canada. When she was here in Ireland in Parliament last year, the center was there as well, and we brought our students too. Just 2 months ago, we were at Microsoft headquarters as well with Ciarán, touring there and speaking to leading experts from different areas about the digital policy questions that big tech are discussing. So that's the center. Those are the outputs. Those are the digital policy questions and educational questions that come up. I hope I've covered everything. We're right on time, I see, and I hope the connection has been stable.
Yeah, no, all good. So thanks very much for that, Liz. I suppose we're just going to bring in Yet next, and she's going to, I suppose, talk to us a little bit from the research perspective from somebody who's working in the Centre for Digital Policy.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Barry, for giving the floor to me. I hope my internet connection is also stable and that everyone can hear me. I'm mostly actually going to talk about my experience as a student, because I also did the course Digital Policy Insight and Threat, and I would love to highlight that, like what's mentioned before by both Elizabeth and Ciarán, is that the digital policy topic sort of it needs to bring together like all the stakeholders, industry, government, as well as academia. And I feel like that's very much reflected in the course itself. So every week there's different topics that are very topical at the moment. And we approach it using academic papers, as was Liz just saying, to look at it from like the multi-stakeholder perspective. And so one thing that I actually would like to highlight is that every week there's we take another topic and we look at it from this multi-stakeholder perspective. And so that's like one thing I want to highlight, is that the topics are so interesting. And then the other thing is also something that Liz just said, is that every week there's Liz tries to bring in a guest lecturer that's someone who's very much a spokesperson, or very much like an expert in that specific topic, on that specific topic. So, for example, we had Ciarán there as a guest lecturer, but also Richard Brown, who's a cybersecurity expert, who was also just featured. So it's very interesting to be hearing from the experts themselves. And I think one thing that students are also very interested in is the skills that are needed, because actually you want to like be working in the digital policy field. So in my experience, the assessment in the course very much reflects the skills that are needed. So for example, we had to do an oral presentation on a digital policy topic of our choosing, and we had to do a policy paper overview. We had to write it down. So even though it's an academic institute, of course, and the readings are very much academic orientated or peer-reviewed papers, of course it's digital policy. So the skills that are needed for that, to be able to work in that field, are very much reflected in the assessments. Like I said, like in an oral presentation or in a written assignment, that's a policy brief. So I feel like from a student perspective, the course is very interesting, very interdisciplinary as well, because, for example, I've got a social science background, but in order to actually dive into the digital policy field, you just not only need like social science perspective, but also the legal perspective, for example. And the course is not too technical either on the social science side or the legal law side, but it's like from the policy lens, it sort of hits all the notes and sort of looks at all the angles that are needed to get a good overview of what's currently happening in the digital policy area. So yeah, I, like Barry is mentioning, I am now working as a research assistant at the center, and yeah, I feel like that my experience as a student is now continuing on while I'm working as a research assistant. So yeah, that's a bit of my experience. I hope I think I just want to sort of reiterate that I feel like both the assessments as well as the topics and the guest lecturers that are being brought in have given me at least a very solid foundation and a confidence that I can actually work in a digital policy field. So yeah, that's actually everything I wanted to share with you.
That's great. Thanks very much for that. Yes, and I think to some extent, what you're talking about there with the skills nearly falls nicely into the one of the first questions we have here. That's for Ciarán. It's in the chat. So I suppose from the skills perspective, with something like AI developing so quickly, and then I suppose the implementation through ChatGPT and other LLMs, how do you kind of balance that opportunity and risk from your own perspective in Microsoft, and then what skills do you need to try and, I suppose, keep up?
How long have we got, Barry?
We'll give you a few minutes.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that Microsoft have, and this is worth sort of reflecting on, Microsoft have been around since 1975. So Microsoft has seen a few technological innovations come, go, spike up, and whatever else. I would say the emergence of this level of AI and ChatGPT capacity is probably seen as more transformational than almost anything other than the widespread access to the internet. And so it's certainly seen as a major priority for the organization, and the agility with which the company is moving to try and embrace that and harness that capability. There's a very acute awareness, though, of the legislative and regulatory environment in which this emerges. And there's all sorts of geopolitical dimensions to this from a European perspective, from a wider global perspective, who's leading and where is the leadership coming from. I posted in the chat, I think it hopefully landed, a LinkedIn post by our president, Brad Smith, who a couple of weeks ago gave a pretty substantive speech on some principles around which AI governance should be developed. And it was really an attempt by Microsoft to put our hand up and say, this is big, we get that it is big, and we get that it is challenging. And it is important for a company like Microsoft that has the maturity of Microsoft and that has seen these types of issues evolve and develop in the past, maybe not at the level of public engagement and awareness, to say, this is our view on how good governance and good regulation can be developed. And it actually speaks quite a bit to some of the content of my own presentation, that it is a challenge for governments. And I know that officials and some politicians are very nervous about this. And part of that is because some of the coverage tends to be at the one end of the spectrum as to what this is or is not. But I think we're probably going to get into a phase of a slightly more calibrated conversation. Microsoft have sort of made its initial contribution to that conversation. That contribution builds on work that's 5 or 10 years old in terms of ethical AI principles and human-centric AI development from Microsoft. So we're looking to have continuous engagement with the policymakers and the legislators to say, we want to have a conversation how this can and should work for all citizens. And if you lose the audience on this one, you might never get them back. So it's important to get it right. And that's really the focus of Microsoft and Brad Smith and our CEO, Satya Nadella.
Very good. And I suppose just to maybe follow on from that, and maybe Liz can come in as well, with maybe a bit of the perspective on it, is, you know, you talk about the time it takes to get policy through. What if it's not fit for purpose? How quick can the boat turn?
I mean, yeah, ChatGPT is something the likes of which we have yet to grapple with, and I think Ciarán is right that it represents a form of tech disruption, not necessarily positive or negative, the likes of which we haven't seen since the access to the internet. The point of our program and our center is to put together skills to allow people to do what's called future-proof the digital policy landscape. So it's to put together a set of skills in order to be responsive to new technology that comes down the pipe. If you're going to use ChatGPT in a university environment, what are the legal, ethical, technical questions that come up that are attached to it? Which people need to be drawn into that conversation? How do the stakeholder relationships impact this space? What we do is put together a series of critical building blocks and skills that allow people to adapt, as Ciarán says, agilely to new technologies that come down the pipe, so that when something new and as explosive as ChatGPT rolls out on the scene, we've got a cohort of policymakers that have those tools in their kit in order to start responding effectively. Our point is to build that capacity to respond to questions that haven't even emerged yet. And that's the focus of our center and our educational programs.
Can I just build on that a little bit further, Barry?
Yep.
I think it is worth noting that, say, in the AI issue generally, and I think it's also worth noting that the ChatGPT, the OpenAI ChatGPT, is one version of that, and that got a lot of coverage in the Irish government, and there were parliamentary questions about whether it was being used for parliamentary questions and things like that. But probably the two most consequential government officials in responding to that agenda are Jean Carberry, who's the Assistant Secretary in the Department of Enterprise, who was the principal author of the government's AI strategy, and Richard Brown, who's the Director of the National Cybersecurity Centre, who everybody is pivoting to, looking for guidance on what should happen next with these types of tools. And both of them are integral partners of the program. And that's exactly how I really think these policy conversations should develop and evolve. And I know Microsoft are working with the Department of Enterprise, as other industry partners are, on looking at how to get your arms around this conversation as well. So just think that's noteworthy in terms of the two people that we put in the slides.
Yeah, no, definitely. You kind of resonated as you're talking about the experts that you're getting into the courses. And look, just maybe a little finish upper as we're getting close to the end. And I think Liz touched on it a little as well. How do you kind of simplify it? You know, you've got your terms and conditions with something and nobody really reads them. How do you kind of demystify it or de-risk it so that people can kind of, I suppose, understand what's going on or what digital policy means? What are the best tools you can use? Maybe we start with you, Liz.
Sorry, I thought you was direct to Liz. Liz, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the terms and services question, which leads to what a lot of people have identified as consent fatigue, privacy fatigue, information fatigue. From the perspective of the center, it goes back to that question of citizens being active policy participants, that we start to repurpose the landscape that acknowledges the agency of the policy participants within it. So you've raised a very narrow and specific question that has all of the issues that I outlined attached to it. And again, developing policy that goes forward wouldn't burden every citizen out there with a lengthy list of terms and services every time they pick up a new piece of tech, but would rather make the tech and its inner workings more transparent, more accessible, and would give individuals engaging that technology the ability to consent and more agency within that landscape. Those are ambitious plans attached to the center's outputs, and we'll be working towards that in the long term.
Yeah, very good. And look, yeah, obviously a little bit of a loaded question, but look, I suppose it's just to kind of show that this thing isn't just a simple one size fits all.
No, not at all. And I think it is worth noting that from a Microsoft point of view, this program is atypical in terms of the collaboration. Like Microsoft has partnerships with different AGIs around the world, but in terms of a program that is developed in an iterative fashion with people from the Department of the Taoiseach, the Department of Enterprise, civil society groups, NGOs, other academics from other institutions, it really is atypical, and certainly in the universe that I'm operating in currently. And I think as a model, it is something that Microsoft are certainly interested in sort of exploring further, because we think it is a good way of trying to socialize and empower as many people to participate as Liz has described. But it also has governments pulled into it as well, and they're the ones. We do have a parliamentary democracy. We do need to try and make sure that our elected parliamentary system is empowered to make the decisions that are in the interests of the citizens,
Very good. And look, I suppose that's maybe a nice way to wrap us up. We probably went a little longer than we thought, just with the questions and answers, but it was great just to pick your brains a little on the discussion. So look, I'd like to thank all my speakers, Ciarán, Liz, Yet, and then Circa for her introduction at the start. From the micro-credentials perspective as well. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to get in touch afterwards, and the webinar recording will also be circulated after this. So look, thanks everyone, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks
for
everyone.
having
Thanks,
us.
Barry.